There's a place in the American Northwest where Char. Greetings to all the lovely ladies and gentlemen out there. I'm your host, the Pro Gent. It has been a hot second since I've been around. Lots been going on, and I figured since it is the favorite spooky month of many folk, I would get a little recording going down with one of my favoritist boys,
Ooh.
Sam from the Silver Screen Fiends.
Oh, hello, Progent.
And not just the Silver Screen Fiends now, you're also one of the co-hosts for Retro Roulette.
This is true. Your premier source for YouTube gaming videos.
Which they just recently recorded with a friend of ours, Terry Diebold, who is the owner of the only known prototype, the Nintendo PlayStation, which was going to be the new system from Nintendo before they went to Philips. He has a whole history with it. It's a really interesting story how he found it, how he ended up owning it, traveling around the world with it. We got to play it in our hotel room at MagFest a few years back, which is a real treat. And of course, we also gave him a game to go with it.
Yes, we gave him Pocky and Rocky for the Super Famicom.
Which we all signed, and it's been traveling the world since. But he's looking for somebody to sell it to. I can understand that, considering that it's a lot of traveling and.
Sure, yeah, it's a lot of hard work.
It is. So good on him. He's always been a good guy, and hope that he finds a buyer soon. But what we're here to talk about today is spooky month related things.
Ooh, the spook.
So, I could definitely say that between you and I, we are very big horror fans.
You might say that.
We revel in the macabre and the morbid. We have particular delights when it comes to older horror as well. Our favorite boy, Vincent Price, being a staple in our Halloween traditions.
Oh, for sure. Yes, I will be mentioning him later on.
Delightful. We will probably have an episode completely devoted to Vincent Price in the future, but today we're going to do just generally 3 of our favorite horror movies to watch around Halloween. These can be essentially anything that we really want, so I wanted to be a little diverse with my choices. And I feel like both of us have pretty diverse choices across the board.
I would say for the most part, I am excited to get into it, and it's great that you capped it at 3, because if it was like a top 5 or top 10, I would have been tremendously overwhelmed with what to pick, because there's just such a vast pool of movies and books and shows that I could just keep listing off till the cows come home, but I feel like 3 is a solid number.
Yeah, and originally I wanted to do 3 different genres or mediums that we could talk about, but that would just muddle the pool a little bit more than I would hope for. I have favorite anime to watch during Halloween, and I have favorite video games to watch a playthrough of or play myself, and there's so much to enjoy about Spooky Month across the board that it really is hard to just pigeonhole 1 or 2 favorites across any particular medium. But when it's film, since there's so many, it's a little easier.
Oh yeah, definitely. I feel like even though it's vast, you're still narrowing the pool down quite a bit.
Yeah. So for today, I will probably start with the latest film uh, released, and then work my way back to the past.
Oh, okay.
Yes,
I like
yes.
this.
So my first film that I want to talk about is one of my personal favorites by John Carpenter.
Oh,
We both love John Carpenter's work.
yes we do. The Pioneer.
His his work on The Thing is still respected and to be admired to this day. It's one of the best horror movies ever made. But I'm not actually talking about The Thing. I am talking about probably one of his less popular films, but I think one of his most fun films.
Mm-hmm. That's a good statement.
Uh, this is 1980's The Fog.
Yes, I like The Fog. I do feel like he has such a big body of work, and everyone usually talks about Halloween or The Thing or They Live, but I think like The Fog just lies on, like what you said, the perfect spectrum of fun and ghost story, and it's just atmosphere. Because Carpenter is a master of building atmosphere, and I think The Fog is a perfect example of that.
Exactly. And The Fog is one of those films that is actually very it's not kill happy. There's very few deaths that actually happen in it, which is rare in not only a Carpenter horror film, but just horror films in general, because horror films try and get as many deaths in as possible.
Right. Yeah. And it's also
If I
important.
recall,
Hmm.
if I recall I don't know if it was the director or the uh, the studio behind Friday the 13th, where they told the director how, like, you need to have a kill every so many minutes to keep people's interests, which I think is silly. You don't need that in a horror movie to keep people in their seats really invested.
No, no, you don't. And a good example is like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, because a lot of people equate. It's funny because a lot of it's kind of like this weird Mandela effect with that movie, because a lot of people seemingly recall that it was this real big gore fest and tons of deaths by Leatherface, but if you actually go back and watch it, it's not really like that at all.
No,
And the
not at
few
all.
kills that are projected on screen, you don't even technically see that well. So
Yeah, it's a very dirty movie in that regard, because like the the colors and the I mean the direction in general with the set design, like it's a very, like, you feel dirty just being there.
yeah, that is a good word for it for sure.
But I I can understand why people equate these sort of, like, no, there's got to be so much blood and gore to make all those popcorn eating masses really satisfied, like you get with The Conjuring and Annabelle nowadays.
Right.
But I think The Fog is just a masterpiece, because it's literally just a very simple ghost story in a very prime location, just a small little town by the sea in California. And it's got a great cast as well. Very, very good John Carpenter cast.
Yeah, very Carpenter.
Uh, lead actress Adrienne Barbeau. Jamie Lee Curtis is in that. Tom Atkins. You just got a real great cast.
Oh yeah.
And the plot of The Fog is that an old sailor of sorts is telling a ghost story to some children in the middle of the night about a ship called the Elizabeth Dane, which was run by, I believe, pirates. I want to say, I think it was pirates,
Yeah.
uh, or it was either pirates or it was a bunch of lepers or something. Yeah, I think it was lepers,
Hmm.
because the founders of this town didn't want to allow a leper colony onto their land and make it like a terrible little place. So they sank the ship, plundered the treasure, and 100 years later, the ghosts are coming back to get their revenge.
Right, and it's like they purposely chose the 100th anniversary of that town to do it on.
Which is just such a it's such a classic ghost story sort of thing where it's just like after like 100 years
Right,
the
yeah.
ghosts come back to take their revenge. It's such a classic ghost story setup.
It is definitely.
And you have Adrian Barbeau's character Stevie Wayne, who's a DJ on the local radio station, who with her dulcet tones soothes the masses of the town with her various reports and the music that she plays. I really love her character.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then you have Jamie Lee Curtis, who gets picked up on the side of the road, and she's just like, I'm gonna screw the guy that picks me up because he's just handsome, which is just I love the fact that like this is not adhering to the rules of horror films because she has sex and she survives.
And it's Jamie Lee Curtis.
Exactly. But Jamie Lee Curtis gets a pass because, you know, she's Jamie Lee Curtis. She has to survive every time.
Right, exactly.
And there's just so much atmosphere to this movie, like you said, with Tom Carpenter or John Carpenter. What am I saying? I was thinking of Tom Atkins.
Oh, they fused.
They did fuse together. Yes, John Carpenter is a master of setting up atmosphere because
Hmm.
you don't have too much music a lot of the time. You just have the quiet set design, and in this case, there's that aforementioned fog that just billows in from the ocean,
Hmm.
and there's this eerie glow about it, and anywhere that it goes, the ghosts can appear, and it's so 1980 with a lot of the locations when you look at it because you'll see like the supermarket or a gas station and it's just like wow, the branding on this is just so classic. I love it.
Oh yeah, it's that mix of Carpenter and '80s that was like in its prime, that vibe. But speaking of locations, I always found it interesting that The Fog was filmed in like what was it like 5 or 6 different places,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and I was like, okay, I mean, I feel like that's dedication. It's like he never really left California to do it, but he kind of just went all over. But at the same time, I admire that dedication.
Mm-hmm.
I think you get a lot
Yeah,
more variety out of the environment that way.
it is great because usually you have either one location or one prime location and then like a set that you work with.
Right.
But you have these beautiful shots of the various areas that they shoot in, and like the lighthouse where Stevie Wayne does her show, which is really really pretty, and the the various locations in the town and the church. And the church is obviously the place where you find the secrets of this great horror story because the pastor is one of the descendants of the men who killed the lepers who wanted who had this money in this ship.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe that was Hal Holbrook who played the played the pastor. And he just happens to find a diary from his ancestor in a brick in the wall that he just randomly finds, and that's sort of just the whole point of his character reading these excerpts from this diary and finding out like, holy crap, all of my ancestor and all of these guys who made this town are terrible people.
Yep. Fun to find that out.
And there's a lot of fun naming in this film as well, because there's a lot of reference names in this. Um, Dan O'Bannon being one of the names of the characters, who's the screenwriter for Carpenter's film Dark Star from the 70s.
Oh,
And
good catch.
there's a character who literally called Dr. Fibes.
Oh, damn it. You just revealed one of my topics.
I'm looking forward to talking about it. Um, which I think is just a lovely nod
Mm-hmm.
to our boy.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And yeah, there's so much good stuff going on in this movie. There's not much plot, really. Like this is one of those movies where it's just like you could be describing the movie to any person, and the plot can be summed up in a sentence, but everything built around the plot is atmosphere, it's character development,
Mm-hmm.
it's great location shots. There's just
Yeah.
so much going on that makes the movie more interesting.
Yeah, I gotta say that that's sort of like a signature Carpenter approach in his direction because I mean other movies he's done very clearly have plot lines, but it's only as linear as far as okay, like here's Michael Myers. This was a dude who became a psycho and like he killed his sister when he was young and he decided to just say fuck the world and do his own thing and then he like gets
Mm-hmm.
released from the penitentiary and then Jamie Lee Curtis gets stalked by him, but it's never direct in the sense that it's like there's not really any plot devices in that movie. It's just kind of like it's Halloween night and she's just hoping that she'll survive. And she just like all the characters kind of go about their business. So,
Yeah, yeah.
but I think yeah, like you said, Carpenter he's all about atmosphere and as great of a filmmaker as he is, I'd argue that he's on par if not better as a composer because if it wasn't for the music he created, you wouldn't get any of the feeling you'd get in these movies. And
Oh, for sure.
he's a very big fan of low synth tones and real bassy reverb. And that way you're kind of just left
Which
thinking
I
like what the hell is going on, but I'm a little bit
Yeah,
unnerved at this.
yeah. I probably the best example of his scores is the Thing,
Oh,
because the
absolutely.
Thing's
Yes.
theme, the Thing's music is like, it's not something you want to put on your phone or your MP3 player,
Right.
because it's just a very tonally focused sound
Yeah.
most of the time.
Exactly. Yeah, I was going to use that as an example. It's a perfect example because in that movie, you have this weird alien creature. You don't know where it could be at any time. It could be inside someone, it could be inside an object. None of the cast knows. And so you already have that tension. And then you throw in the fact that it's winter, and then you throw in the fact that the music while doing nothing to actually exaggerate the environment, at the same time, it does just that because he keeps it simple and he just keeps it very low. And that's kind of like what incites the creep inside of you.
Yeah, and a lot of really what the Thing does in that regard is like, there's all these subtle details with the movie that it builds up the tension through not only the characters and the very tonally monotone music, but then you also throw in like masterful lighting and whatnot, like the scene with the blood testing,
Oh, yeah, arguably the
uh
best scene.
where like every character that isn't the Thing has a light shining out of their eyes, except the one guy who is the thing, and he's like looking down, so you don't get to see that light in his eyes.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like it's a very subtle thing, but it's just so masterfully done,
Oh yeah, absolutely.
and that's just praise to go to this brilliant director who really, like, almost all of his films from the 70s and the 80s are just classics at this point. And I that's kind of why I like The Fog the most, because it's so underrated compared to the others.
Yeah, it really is. Absolutely.
uh it's classic ghost story. Not everybody's into just like old fashioned ghost stories with not too many with not a high body count, but like I think that makes it more interesting because it's more about the characters than about the kills.
Yeah, yeah. And that's, again, is a staple Carpenter treatment. And I think it's also important in horror to kind of have that mix of the action and the character development because, I mean, these movies are a dime a dozen. And especially these days. I mean, you could literally reach into a hat or pull out any low budget indie horror, and it's
Mm.
going to probably be cookie cutter, or it's going to be so experimental to the point that it's devoid of any feeling. So Carpenter seems to
Yeah.
find the perfect balance with all of that.
Hmm. But yeah, there's not too much more that I can really say about the movie in general, just because there's not too much to say
Yeah,
when
yeah, that's true.
there's it's just you have to see it to really understand the tension and the character development, the the time capsule to what was probably mostly uh 1979, but in reality in 1980, because it was released very early 1980s.
Yeah, it was 1980 actually.
Yeah, because they released it early 1980, but most of this was shot in like 1979.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And another boon to it is that it is a short film. That this is not a super long horror movie that you're going to be seeing. This is like a right about 90-minute movie, and that's something that is not as appreciated today, because you have to get like a 2-hour mark with most movies.
yeah. That's kind of why I have an affinity for classic horror because the longest runtime on those is like an hour 20,
Yeah, exactly.
and I love
You
it.
don't need you don't need a lot of time to tell a good spook story, but
Right.
um, I think that this is like the perfect, like it's sort of like your favorite candy. You get one or two pieces of it, and it's just a perfect little snack.
Yeah. I I would describe the fog as a perfect little snack. I like that.
Yeah, yeah. So, what is your first of three?
Well, I'm going to stick with an order that's kind of small, medium, and large. And that's
Okay.
kind of based on my obsession with each. So I'm going to start out with an animated title, which is Halloween is Grinch Night. And for those that may know me out there, I am a very big Dr. Seuss fan. And
Mm-hmm.
more specifically, the slew of shorts that were released in the 70s and 80s.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a vast collection of VHS tapes that had, you name it, Sam I Am, Green Eggs and Ham, the Zacks, the Sneetches, Pontafel
Mm-hmm.
Pock, the Hooper Blue Highway, and one that I ended up discovering a little bit later in time was Halloween is Grinch Night because they would always advertise it. I forgot what network. It was so long ago. It might have been PBS or something. But
Mm-hmm.
I remember when I first saw the trailer for this movie, it just, something about it was just like fucking super eerie. And I knew that being a big Seuss fan, I had to check it out. And so basically, this is a short film. It's like 26 minutes, I think.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
And most of the Dr. Seuss shorts are like that. And so I believe it was released in the late 70s, and it features our boy the Grinch, who, it's unfortunate because, as we all know, in How the Grinch Stole Christmas, Boris Karloff voiced him.
Oh, the boy.
He voiced him and narrated the production. Unfortunately, this was being produced when Karloff was passed away. So they actually got Hans Conried, which did a pretty good job. If no one recognizes the name, he's been on like the George Burns and Gracie Allen show, and I'm the only sick fuck who would watch that show because I'm 20.
I think
I'm 28.
I, I think the majority of the audience would probably recognize him as Captain Hook and George Darling from Peter Pan, Disney's Peter Pan.
Oh yeah, yep. He is Captain Hook, and he's also been on I Love Lucy, and he's just done like a bunch of things. But so he did a pretty good job, I have to admit. But it's really cool because Thurl Ravenscroft, who sung in How the Grinch Stole Christmas, also the voice of the original Tony the Tiger, he also provided his masterful vocals whenever they were singing in this one. And
Yes.
his voice is phenomenal. Like, that is a voice you want to hear for anything spooky or mysterious.
Yeah, it's like we would say that most voices are like they melt you like butter, but like Ravenscroft is like a thick cream because of how booming and deep it is.
Yes, it is. There's no better way to describe it. Please look it up if you don't know what I mean. You could just, if you actually don't even look it up, just think back to You're a Mean One, Mr. Grinch, and you'll probably know exactly what we're talking about. But anyway, so this was I keep drawing parallels to How the Grinch Stole Christmas for a couple reasons. Number one, because this is essentially. People argue about this, and they say like, oh, it's technically a prequel or a sequel, but there's really no canonical timeline of when this came out. It's just kind of like it's a standalone Grinch story.
I mean, I don't know who's keeping the sacred Grinch timeline for the soon to be made Dr. Seuss cinematic universe.
Well, this is the lore that I care about. But no, I do know that it is Halloween, so you could, I guess, place it before Christmas, but Max leaves in this one, so I would put it after. But anyway, so let me kind of get into this. So, for those that don't know, How the Grinch Stole Christmas was, the art direction was done by, Chuck Jones. Why did I blank out on Chuck Jones? Wow. So Chuck Jones did that, but Patty Frayling did this one. And for those that don't know, that studio has worked on the Lorax and the Pink Panther, and they were also sort of commissioned out to do some of the Wile E. Coyote tunes. But so they're basically like the poor man's Hanna-Barbera in a sense. Like they do quality work, but they were never big in the press. So, but anyway, the movie takes place in Whoville, just like in Grinch Stole Christmas, and there's this whole exposition building up to the Grinch and how he comes down on nights that there's a sour, sweet wind blowing, and so you see all those events play out, and all the Who's start going mad because they know that the Grinch is gonna come because the everything is kind of lined up, unfortunately, against them.
Right.
So there's this little kid Euchariah, and he's like a little geeky who, and he wants to go to the bathroom, and everyone in his family is like, don't do that. And Yukurai's like, I don't care. Like, if I see the Grinch, fucking. Like, he's obviously scared, but at the same time, he didn't really think it would be a big deal just to go to the outhouse, which was, like, right in their yard. So, he ends up getting blown away by the wind. And he. As this is happening, the Grinch is slowly descending from Mount Crumpet. And Max, his unfortunately abused canine friend, is dragging the wagon along, and they eventually bump into each other. And the Grinch is like, "Oh, like who the hell are you, kid?" And Euchariah like wants to stand up to him because he knows that it's the only way he can confront his fears. So, and he also realizes that if he's able to stall him, at least he's going to be doing something good for the village. So Euchariah is like, you know what? I bet you can't really scare me. And the Grinch is like, well, I bet I can. And they have this whole back and forth. And the Grinch invites him up into the top of his wagon. And once inside the wagon, it then plays out like a 2 to 3 minute really surreal scene of the Grinch mocking him, and there's a bunch of these monsters chasing him around, and he's like basically scared out of his mind, but he knows that he has to hold on until that wind dies down and the Grinch can go back up the mountain. So he does a good job sticking it out, but it's only what I could equate to as somebody dropping acid and having a somewhat bad trip and then realizing that they have to stay focused and then they power through it. So
it's sort of like mixing the pink elephant scene from Dumbo with Night on Bald Mountain.
yeah, pretty much. And
like you take the spookiness of Night on Bald Mountain, but then throw in all the acid from
yeah, and a little bit of skidoo, and throw it into a big pot. But so he survives that, even though he's scared. He's like, I gotta do this, and so then the Grinch is like, wow, like I cannot believe you actually survived that. And so he packs up and retires to his cave, and Max, his dog, is just fed up with the Grinch. And he goes home with Euchariah, which was really nice. It was a nice sentiment because we've seen him be abused by the Grinch before. So it was nice that he was like, you know what? Frig it. I'm going to do what's best for me. And
it's good stuff.
Yeah, then it cuts back to Whoville. All the wind dies down and all the hack and cracks stop howling and all the creatures subside, and all the residents basically celebrate Euchariah because they're like, wow, we cannot believe you had the balls to do this when everyone else was scared shitless. So it cuts back to the Grinch going up the mountain. And this part is great because this is kind of the part of the trailer that really got me interested in the movie. You see him going up the mountain, and he kind of has like a tiny little monologue, and at the very end of it, he turns to the camera and he goes, "And I'll be back someday." And then the music behind it is kind of just like dun dun, and then it cuts and he laughs, and I was like, wow, that's actually pretty terrifying. But yeah, I mean, because this was such a short movie, there's not too much to elaborate on. I do have the VHS somewhere. I know it ended up being released like 20 years later. And
yeah.
I know it's really cool because last year they reissued How the Grinch Stole Christmas on Blu-ray. And in it, they actually included remastered versions of The Grinch is the Cat in the Hat, which is another good short, and Halloween is Grinch Night. So now I own that remastered, and it looks great. And it's awesome because I just love the fact that Dr. Seuss, he just had a vision for everything he did, and when he was doing these animated shorts, he commissioned them out to high-profile animators, and he was like, I just kind of want to get whatever message across it is. I don't care about the controversy. I need these messages to come across because Dr. Seuss, very, very big advocate for the environment and his country and keeping families and everyone safe. And I mean, every one of his movies has a message. Like this one is the stand up to your fears and have courage. And the Lorax is about protecting the environment because he went on vacation with his wife Audrey, who actually just died this year,
Oh
and
yeah.
or might have been the end of last year. But anyway, so they went to Africa one time, and he noticed like all the trees are coming down and all the rainforests were being compromised and all this stuff was going on. So he wanted to make the Lorax to kind of. But that's what I'm saying is Dr. Seuss has always been somebody who wants to get a message out, and he didn't care what happened to him in the process.
Hmm.
He's just somebody who went against the grain, and that's why I really love him because he's just the wholesome boy. But anyway, so that's kind of it because it's a half hour and there's
Yeah,
not
it
much
is a
else I
very
can say.
short little piece.
Yeah, but it is a tradition. It's been a tradition for many years. And I think people would enjoy it, especially if they enjoy Dr. Seuss. I mean, it's friggin' awesome.
Yeah,
It's a rip roaring good time.
exactly, exactly.
Yes.
So yeah, the Grinch Night's a really nice little smorgasbord of what makes Dr. Seuss interesting and uh, what makes the Grinch a fun character.
Mm-hmm.
There's something so delightful about a loathsome character who he's just sort of an asshole, but he's one of those assholes that is lovable for a lot of reasons.
Oh yeah, it really is kind of like that. It's that conflicted anti-hero story. It's just like he's a dick, but there's something about him that keeps you coming back.
Hmm. Hmm. So, my second piece that is probably my favorite movie, like one of my definitive favorite movies of all time,
Oh, let me hear it.
is, and I know we've talked about it before, but this will be me talking a little
Mm-hmm.
bit more in depth about it. Is Hausu from 1977.
Oh boy, hold on. I have an extra tab. Let me take it real quick. Oh, what a trip, man! I love Hausu.
How Hausu is just a treat and a half.
Mm-hmm.
This is so for anybody that doesn't know about Hausu, this is a film made by Nobuhiko Obayashi. He's got a decent film career underneath him. He's done a few films based on very great manga and books. Probably the most known being The Girl Who Leapt Through Time, which would become a film that Mamoru Hosoda would direct,
Mm-hmm.
and The Drifting Classroom, which is actually just getting a remaster.
Oh, really?
Uh, the manga for The Drifting Classroom is one of my favorite horror manga of all time, Kazuo Mezu, who is the inspiration for Junji Ito, one of my favorites
Mm-hmm.
when it comes to horror manga. But Hausu is a fever dream inside an acid trip.
Yes, no doubt about it.
It is everything I've ever wanted in a horror movie, and it just so happened to be made in Japan. And that just compounds a lot of other things that I love about Japan.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like it's not only like a classic haunted house story, but it's also a ghost story, and it also has these really fun elements of a coming of age story in a way. And there's just so much going on that it's hard to really pinpoint like what is genuinely going on.
I know you're so conflicted for like most of the film. You're like, oh
But
wait, I kind of understand what's going on. Oh no, I don't.
so the movie starts out with uh, a group of friends who are talking about what they're going to be doing for their summer vacation, and every single one of the characters is named after their defining trait,
Yes, which I love.
which such a good way of naming the characters. So like the main character is called Gorgeous. She's a very beautiful young girl. Um and her friends are uh the professor, who is the smart one, Melody, who plays music, Kung Fu, who's the athlete who knows Kung Fu, Mac, who is the one that likes to eat, Sweet, who is like the super shy, very like wants to be a good housewife kind of character, and Fantasy, who is the person that blows things out of proportions and like she's a daydreamer and whatnot. And the story essentially starts when Gorgeous, who was going to go on a vacation with her father, finds out that her her father, who is a composer for films, comes back from Italy with this brand spanking new wife. And Gorgeous is having none of it because she's just like, you would dare bring a new woman into my life for my mother, and the lady's just like, I want to be a nice mom.
The conflict.
So, Gorgeous is distraught, and then she thinks, you know what, I'm going to write to my aunt, and I'm going to see if I can go spend the summer with her instead.
Mm-hmm.
Which her aunt immediately replies and is just like, yes, please come and visit with me. And then she invites all of her friends. And all of this is like played like a goofy melodrama, like one of those soap operas you'd watch uh, in like 11 a.m. on a weekday.
Yeah, it's like a Telemundo.
And the music plays a lot like that too. It's very 70s, like pop music, very happy. And then they get to the house of aforementioned title.
Mm-hmm.
And the Gorgeous's aunt is a very sweet older woman who welcomes them all into her house. And then things start to happen.
That's a way of putting it.
They bring a watermelon as a gift, and they go to chill it by putting it down into a well to put it in cold water.
Oh God.
And she's giving a tour of the house, and it's all dusty and whatnot, and there's a piano, and there's a cat, and it's like, yeah, this is fine. There's nothing wrong here.
Mm-hmm.
And then Mac, who is just like, I'm hungry after she's eaten like everything, goes to get the watermelon, and then she doesn't come back.
So we then find my favorite part of the whole movie.
Oh my god! So Fantasy goes to see what's happened with Mac, and she goes to the well thinking, oh, she never got the watermelon, so she pulls the rope, bringing it up, and she grabs what she thinks is the watermelon from the bucket, and in reality, it's Mac's head, which just laughs at her, and then it's like it's on an invisible string and it's just floating
Oh god,
around laughing at
I
her.
love this scene so much. It's just such a great campy moment out of all campy moments in the film.
And then like it pretty much ends when Mac's head just sort of latches onto Fantasy's ass by biting on it.
Yeah.
it's it's just such a delight because it's like the best part about it is that the special effects were meant to look this goofy.
Right, yeah, it was a very self-aware vibe. Like it was it's funny cuz like it was a self-aware product at the time, but at the same time it knew what it was doing in that regard.
Exactly. So Obayashi is just like a madman for doing like these goofy graphics, and uh it's oh my god, it's just so funny to
Yeah,
watch.
absolutely.
So then, after that scare, quote unquote, uh the other girls are experiencing various other things. Um Gorgeous goes upstairs and she gets possessed by her aunt's mirror, and you learn that the aunt died like decades ago when she was waiting for her fiance to come back from World War II, and she died of a broken heart.
Mm,
That very classic ghost story backstory,
yes.
uh, but so she's essentially a witch who takes over the body of Gorgeous, and through the rest of the movie is just sort of like picking off all the girls one by one so she can be eternally youthful.
Mhm.
And this includes so many odd scares, quote unquote, and just odd moments. The one scene that I would actually say is like kind of scary because of how over the top it is, and this is the original scary piano scene from anything, was Melody is playing the theme of the film, which is a delightful song. I love this overarching theme.
Yes.
And the piano starts to eat her.
Oh yeah, it's like first it's her fingers and then it's just her entire being.
Like she gets just sucked into this
Yeah.
piano, and uh you see like the piano wire catching on her, on the in betweens of her fingers, and then the next shot you see like a leg sticking out in one spot, her head in the next, and like, and it in a way it looks really wrong, so it makes you feel unnerved for like the first time the entire movie.
Mhm.
All the while, like all the things in the room are like dancing around. Like there's a goofy skeleton who's just like flailing his arms around, and
Yes, as it happens.
Fantasy is just screaming the entire time.
Yep.
And it ends with the piano chomping down on her leg that's still sticking out of the front, and it just sort of flies up, and the whole time is like an epilepsy warning and a half,
Oh yeah.
because there's just all sorts of different colors and flashing lights. And then the scene basically ends with Melody's fingers still playing the song, but it's just the floating fingers.
Mhm.
And it's like that looks like a really good trick because it looks really good.
Yeah, I appreciate that moment.
Um, so then all these, the rest of the characters are like trying to band together because people are disappearing. Um, a very short scene involving Sweet disappearing is essentially her getting eaten by futons that you never see.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
and one of my favorite songs in the whole movie is the theme that plays whenever Kung Fu beats the shit out of something.
Mhm. Oh my gosh, yes.
It's such a catchy tune.
Yeah.
I'll probably play it at some point in this video, just as a segue between segments.
Please do.
Um, and so fantasy, the professor, and kung fu are the only ones left, and then they're like deducing like what can we do to stop uh this whole thing, and then uh kung fu finds Sweet's body like stuck in a grandfather clock, and like blood just starts dripping down, and she's just sort of staring at her from inside the clock, and like that's actually a creepy bit.
Yeah, well, you had me at Sweet getting trapped in the clock, and then there's just all that ensues.
Exactly, yeah. And Gorgeous comes down dressed as a bride, and she's that's when like you get the reveal. And I'll have to take a moment to say that all while this is happening, their teacher is on their way to
Oh,
meet
yes,
them.
that's right.
Who Fantasy is like crushing on, and it's just this goofy guy who like there's this scene that's literally like stop animation, because it's just frame by frame him tripping down a set of stairs.
Yes. Oh my
And
god.
he's just like, and then he lands on his ass, and then he's just like, it's frame by frame him like sliding down the street on his ass, and it's just like, oh my god. And of course the music is like so like 70s
Oh
with
yeah.
all of his scenes.
Mm-hmm.
And he finally arrives in the area where the house is, where this guy who was selling watermelons is, and he's the guy who sold them the watermelon, and it's just this fat guy, and he's like, "Don't you like watermelons?" And they're like dancing at each other, and
Yeah.
he's just like, "No, I like bananas. I like bananas." And then the fat guy gets struck by lightning, and it's just a cartoon skeleton that just falls apart. Oh my god! It's just like, what the fuck is even happening?
Yeah, it's like most people who would look in like a third party perspective that didn't understand what this movie was would be like, what is this film trying to do? Is this like is this a Scooby-Doo story of the week? Is this a weird 70s horror? Is this but I love that about it.
Which when you mentioned Scooby Doo, I also want to say, just a side note, I'm very disappointed that they made a sequel to Scooby Doo on Zombie Island,
Oh, yes. That's
because Zombie Island is a
uh-huh.
masterpiece. Like that's like the best Scooby Doo thing ever made. Between the music and the animation and whatnot, like and that's actually like a scary film. Like that's a
Yes,
genuinely
I
like one of the only
know. I always
Scooby-Doo
tell
films
people
that's
that
spooky,
too.
because it's like I just remembered the other day, like the pirates drove locals into a swamp and alligators
Yes.
literally ate them. Like, holy
Oh
crap.
god. That's great though. Yes.
But Scooby-Doo aside, so the only ones left are Professor, Fantasy, and Kung Fu, and the and the house just starts attacking them, and they realize like the cat is the one behind everything, because cats in Japanese lore usually have uh, a spirit in them, because if they live long enough, they just become like a near infinitely living creature.
Ah, yes, Blanche the cat.
And they can tend to be malicious, so they think
Mm-hmm.
it's some sort of a bakeneko.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're like, we need to stop this. So they attack a portrait of Blanche that's on the wall, and then it just starts throwing up blood.
Yeah,
And
which
it's
is great. This is my favorite part because you mentioned earlier when Melody was playing that was like the first time you were actually shook. This is when I was actually creeped out because like the blood starts flooding the room.
yeah, and the and it's and the music that's playing is just like, what is going on? Like, this is not like your typical horror movie like stinger sound to denote a jump scare. Like, this is like deep deep singers who are just like
Hmm.
doing this one tone while like it's almost like a clanging is in the back, and like it's just like what is going on.
Yeah, all the while Fantasy is paddling towards Gorgeous, who's still in the bridal gown,
uh, and
and then oh my god, so creepy.
and kung fu, like she gets eaten by a lamp, I think.
Yeah, yeah. Yes.
and
Oh my god, yeah. The
and
light fixture just becomes possessed, and it's like, ah.
and like what the scene that follows that is like her head floating surrounded by like creepy faces that are painted on a wall,
Uh
and
huh.
then her legs literally come out of the wall to kick the portrait again, like
Oh my god.
specifically her legs. The rest of her's dead. It's just one final kick is coming out, which is just
Yeah, it's like trick or treat.
oh my
It's like what the
god.
fuck. Oh
And
god.
then the professor is like being pulled into the blood that's just filling up the house, and like for some reason all of her clothes are slipping off, so like it's just this weird scene where she's like swimming around naked in the
Mm-hmm.
blood,
Yeah.
and then Gorgeous finally gets Fantasy out of the blood, and it's very assumed that Fantasy is killed in this moment because uh she sort of cradles Fantasy, and is like
Yeah.
telling her it's gonna be okay because she still
And you
thinks
know
it's
what's gonna
Gorgeous.
happen. Right. And then you know what happens at that point.
So the stepmom arrives the next morning,
Mm, yeah.
and she drives past the teacher's car that is filled to the brim with bananas, which
Yes.
is just like, holy crap, that's a good joke. And it's playing like it's gone back to like that Days of Our Lives like melodrama piano music
Mm-hmm.
as the wind is blowing her veil as she's driving up to the house, and Gorgeous greets her, and she she says, "Oh, my friends are will be waking up soon," and she feeds her stepmother tea, and then her stepmom just sort of like burns away, like, and it's not like burning away in the sense where like she catches on fire, like if I recall it's just her face like breaks apart like glass, and like there's just fire underneath it, and then she just it's so weird.
Yeah. It's like, okay, I'll shake your hand now, and then just okay, done. Great.
Oh my god, I love this film so much, and the craziest thing to me is that this was a movie that was very negatively uh, reviewed when it first came out in Japan in the 70s. Like no one wanted this movie. And then
Mm.
out of nowhere, the Criterion Collection picks it up and releases it across America, and then they do a Blu-ray release, and it becomes an immediate cult classic.
Yeah, and that's something I was actually gonna say at the beginning of the show because it's important to think about that because Hausu came out in '77, and only in 2010 did it get a nationwide release, and so that was only 9 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
and it's attained cult status here and has become a cult film with a big following, and like most films don't become cult to a Western audience for at least a good 30, 40 years. Now, Hausu has been out for 42 years, but it was out
Mm-hmm.
in Japan, and it's
Mm-hmm.
only been here for 9 years. So it's like, to me, that's astronomical that it became a cult film that quickly here.
Yeah, it's such a testament to like it's a testament to what constitutes a cult film, and uh, what steps should be taken to wider releases for films that may not seem like much at first, but like when you when you release it to a much wider audience, it just
Hmm.
becomes so much more.
Right. Yeah. And it is important to remember that art is subjective, and you never really know where something's going to end up in 20, 30, 40 years. And it's just kind of great to see that at the time, this is what people had to work with.
Mm-hmm.
And it was nothing more, nothing less. So the fact that it garners all this attention and respect, that's well deserved. It's a good feeling. It must be a good feeling for the people that look back and they're like, wow, I created that. Especially Obayashi, who is probably the only person you and I ever talk about together that's still alive. Like, I always talk about people who have been gone for like 50 years.
And he's actually
But
a lot younger than I thought. Like I thought,
yeah, he's only in his
I
80s.
yeah,
Yeah.
he's only 81.
Yeah.
And I will say I didn't realize this at the time, but the actress who played the aunt,
Mm-hmm.
she's actually in several Kenji Mizoguchi films,
Oh, that's interesting.
which I love that.
Yeah, and it's another testament to the fact that why you and I love film so much and Criterion and whatever. It's because it just gives you the opportunity to expand your vision
Mm-hmm.
and go out and explore film and other, not just film, but then it opens you up to other cultures. Like I remember I I've always been a fan of Japanese film, so I won't use that as an example, but let's take like French film. Like I never really was big into it, and then I'd watch the works of Jacques Becker and Jean-Luc Godard and Jean Cocteau, and I suddenly just became fascinated with this entirely different culture, and the fact that film opened me up to that is important. I feel like that's really speaking volumes for the medium. But
Oh, for sure.
yeah.
And for me, with when you mentioned French film, I think of a director like René Laloux, who I hope I didn't butcher that name, but yeah, all those that 5 or so years of high school French going to good use. Um,
Is that the guy that did Fantastic Planet?
exactly, that is exactly who
Oh,
it
yep.
was.
And I know that because of Criterion.
And Fantastic Planet is like just a great case of animation that I never knew existed, and I'm glad I do know now because it's like if you took a Terry Gilliam uh
Yes, I was just gonna
and,
say it
and
looks like Terry Gilliam.
if you took Terry Gilliam's stop motion animation but like gave it a big budget and like a very serious story, like instead of just a little comedy sketch, like it's such an interesting sci-fi film, and it's one of those movies that I really appreciate because it's also like super short.
Oh, is it? I've still never
It
seen it, but it's been on my list.
Yeah, it's only about an hour and 15 minutes.
That's interesting. Okay.
So it's very easy to watch. And yeah, so it's because of stuff like Criterion that we get to experience not only more world cinema, but we also get to just expand our horizons even in American cinema. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm so happy that I've discovered more Japanese films through Criterion because yeah, I used to only really be the anime guy for the longest time. I loved anime, I loved animation, but I never really saw Japanese film. And then when I finally got a chance to, through Criterion, with a lot of their really amazing releases from Kurosawa and Ozu and Mizuguchi, I was blown away, and I just discovered this entire facet of myself that I didn't know existed.
Yeah, and it's all thanks to cinema.
Mm-hmm.
It's opens you up, man.
Exactly. So, for my second piece, I would like to say that if you have a chance to see Hausu in any respect, I couldn't recommend this enough. This is genuinely like one of my favorite live action films of all time. Uh, every now and again, Turner Classic Movies has it on, usually super late, but you could probably record it. I remember my first time watching it, I only saw like the last 20 or so minutes of it,
Hmm.
and it was like 3 a.m.
Yeah.
But I was so glad I saw it because it got me like, I was just like, oh, I need to see the rest of this because I am so confused.
Yeah, TCM, late night TCM will do that to you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So on to the next. What is your second
Cool.
favorite?
All right. So this goes down as one of my all time favorites, which is hard to say because I have so many. But I'm going to talk a little bit. I won't go too much into it because, like, number one, I've done an entire episode dedicated to it on my podcast, and number two, you and I are going to do a dedicated Vincent Price show. But I wanted to touch on The Abominable Dr. Phibes,
Oh,
which is arguably my favorite Vincent Price film. And that's
for
like
good reason.
saying, who's your favorite baby? But
Yeah,
like
it's very true.
to me though, it just was this perfect amalgamation of the macabre and dark comedy and horror and art deco and just it's just so well rounded. It's like everything I want in a spooky movie.
I
But
can definitely see that. I'm so annoyed that like this is like everyone's favorite Vincent Price film amongst most of the people I know, and I haven't had the chance to see it because it's
well, yeah,
the Blu-ray of
it's
it is mostly Region B, which I
yes.
technically have a Region B player, but it's hard to find a copy.
Yeah, that's something I was gonna say when I was gonna say like I recommend people watch it is because it is unfortunately quite difficult to get your hands on this, and a lot of American distributors or streaming services don't have it available, and I guess it's just about distribution rights.
Hmm.
But yeah, like Blu-rays cost minimum $30 and you have to import them, which sucks. But you know, it's if anyone ever gets the chance, though, immediately snatch it up because this is worth seeing. But
Hmm.
anyway, so Dr. Phibes is was made in the very early '70s, I believe '71, and it was starring Vincent Price and Joseph Cotton. And oh well, first of all, it was directed by Robert Feist, who did I'm trying to remember what else he's done. I know he's done. Oh yeah, he did like a remake of a movie my mom used to see, which was Wuthering Heights, and I know he's done The Devil's Rain. He's done other things, but nothing like super noteworthy.
Yeah, yeah.
But it stars Vincent Price, obviously, who we do to sit here and claim his credits would be redundant because the man is just, you know, godly.
Hmm.
But but Joseph Cotton is a name that is not super recognizable, but in the film industry is a super important name
Oh, sure.
because he used to work close with Orson Welles. He was in Citizen Kane and The Magnificent Ambersons, which I just saw last year.
Hmm.
And he's also been in Shadow of a Doubt and The Third Man and Duel in the Sun. And so he's also been on Broadway. He was in The Philadelphia Story, which, as we know, got a film adaptation. And he's just been kind of everywhere. But he's one of those people who never really got like a tremendous break later in his career. Like he kind of burnt out quickly, sort of like Wells did. But anyway, that being said, so we have Dr. Anton Phibes, played by Vincent Price, and he very complicated character this guy is. So on the surface, he seems like this crazy plagued man, and but then he's also like a philanthropist, and he is like a PhD in theology and music, and
It's
he's an
essentially Vincent
organ.
Price playing Vincent Price.
Yeah, basically, and he's an organist. And although Vincent Price has a lot more skin in real life than
Hmm.
Phibes, but
Hmm.
so basically, what happens is, a long time ago, like in 1920s, he gets in a car crash when he's in Switzerland, and it was him in the car and his well, no, his wife wasn't in the car. He was actually in a rush because he heard that his wife Victoria died while she was in routine surgery, and so he ends up in a car crash that mutilates him. He survives, but like he was left unable to speak, and he has all these scars. And so what he decides to do is he makes himself up, and he uses prosthetics, and he's like, okay, I mean, I kind of look a little bit better now, but what about my voice? So he decides, because he's an expert in theology and music, that he's going to use the power of acoustics. And he like carries around this phonograph that it projects his voice. And what's funny about this, a little bit of trivia, if I recall this correctly, but I read a while ago that Joseph Cotton got a little bit upset with Price because he was like, wow, he's kind of getting the best deal here. The dude, because Vincent Price dubbed his lines in for the film. Because he's not able to actually speak, he acts in the movie, and then he dubs the lines in after. Right. Which speaks to how great of a performer Vincent Price is, because he's able to maintain that vast expressionism and physicality that we've come to know and love with him without actually speaking in that moment. Mm-hmm. So, and Price was known for not only fluently remembering all of his lines, but remembering everyone else's lines. So Cotton had no right getting pissed because Price does his due diligence and he knows what's going on.
Oh, absolutely.
But anyway, so a couple years later, Fibes, he's mulling over the fact that his wife was killed, and he starts blaming the doctors, and he's thinking it must have been incompetence, and he decides that he's gonna kill the doctors because they were guilty for her death. And so he does this with the help of this female assistant he has. Her name is Volnavia, and she was originally played by Virginia North, but in the sequel, Dr. Phibes Rises Again, it's a different actor because she ends up dying. But she's kind of like this silent femme fatale, and she's just there to kind of enhance the spookiness of the Phibes estate. So what Phibes decides to do is he uses the 10 plagues of Egypt as his inspiration to kill all these people, which, as we know, includes blood and frogs and boils and locusts and darkness, etc., etc. So I thought that was a really cool concept, because most movies, like, oh, okay, we'll make it like a straightforward slasher or just a basic mental psychological thriller, but they decided they're going to do the 10 plagues of Egypt. So what he does is he wears this amulet, and it kind of has the Hebrew letters inscribed to each corresponding plague. And so basically, like, after he starts killing them, he ends up getting noticed by this inspector, not Gadget though, his name is Trout, and he learns that there is a connection to all these doctors, and the head doctor, Dr. Vesalius, who worked on Victoria Price, not Victoria Price, you know what I mean, Victoria Phibes, tells the deceased on his team, they're treating Victoria, that these other doctors are now going to be in trouble. So he actually discovers one of Phibes' Hebrew amulets at the scene of one of the murders, and he takes it to a jeweler, and he he has to like go to a rabbi to find out what the hell it means, and then that's when he starts piecing together what Phibes is doing. And so Trout knows that he must still be alive, because there's no coincidence here. It's all it's all pretty cut and dry. So they go to Phibes' mausoleum, and they just want to confirm everything. So they find a box of ashes in Phibes' old coffin, but they're thinking that it's probably not Phibes. And then they realize Victoria's coffin is completely empty. So now they're like, holy shit. What's going on here? And I want to take a step back and kind of recount some of my favorite kills from the movie. And so, like I mentioned, he does the plagues. And one of the plagues is frogs. So what Dr. Phibes does is he tracks down one of the doctors at a masquerade party where everyone's wearing a mask. And the guy there doesn't have a mask, and Phibes comes in and he has this frog mask that he manufactured. And excuse me. And he puts it on him, and there's a mechanism inside of the frog mask that keeps squeezing the doctor's head tighter and tighter. And so the doctor's trying to scream for help. People are like, what's going on? But he's in a mask, so it's hard for people to take him seriously. And then you just see red on the screen, and then he falls to his death. And to me, that's like, and all this classical music is going on, and it's just wonderful.
But you
mm-hmm.
describing all of this to me just really reminds me of another Price film, Theater of Blood.
Oh yes, a classic.
Which just hits all of the same beats in just a slightly different way, because it's like the main character, an actor called Lionheart, is taking his revenge on all of the critics that he had.
Yes, yep.
And all of the kills are based on death scenes from Shakespeare plays, and he ends up like rewriting certain scenes so that it includes a death, and it's just like, oh my god, that is so fun.
Yeah, there are some parallels between the films, and it's kind of like a very signature Price thing, I think.
Oh, gotta love him.
Oh yeah. So basically, Phibes goes on with his murders, and then once it's just Dr. Vesalius left, the police are kind of focusing their efforts on protecting him. So what Phibes decides to do is, if he can't get to Vesalius, he'll kidnap his son. And so he contacts Vesalius and says, come alone to my mansion if you ever want to see your son again. So Inspector Trout's like, I wouldn't do that. This is clearly a trap. And Vesalius, they get into a little bit of a heated conversation about it, and Vesalius decides to knock the inspector unconscious. And then he races to the mansion. And so he goes into this little surgery room, and he finds out that Vesalius' son is under anesthesia, and he's being prepped for surgery. And so Phibes, this is why I love him as a character, because he's very coldly calculated. And he's troubled, but he's also a devious dick. So Phibes, he put a small key near the boy's heart that will unlock his restraints. And Vesalius has to surgically remove the key from his own son within 6 minutes, which was the exact same amount of time that Phibes' wife Victoria was on the operating table. And there is this vat of acid above the son's head that will drop and horribly scar his face the same way it did to Phibes. So Vesalius is like, holy shit, I gotta do this. So he operates on him, and he's actually successful, and he moves the table so the son doesn't get hurt. But Volnavia is, she was ordered separately to destroy Phibes' mechanical creations, and ends up getting surprised by the inspector. And as she's backing away during the scene, she ends up getting sprayed with the acid, and it's alleged that she dies from it. So, convinced that he is done with all of this and he's gained success through murder, Fibes returns to his basement. And this is where you see his wife. And she's embalmed. And he's keeping the fluid going. He gets in the sarcophagus and he drains his own blood and embalms himself. And the coffin, there's this big stone lid that locks into place and it conceals it. And just as this coffin is lowering, Trout and the rest of the police make it just in time to miss him, and they don't see him because now the coffin is lowered and shut. And so they know that not all of the plagues were done here, and they know that the final one is darkness for 3 days, and so it leads them to believe that they're going to see Dr. Fibes again, which happens in Dr. Fibes Rises Again, which is a lot easier to find online. You can find that streaming, and you can find DVDs for cheap. But I would say that this is definitely one of my favorite Price films, and it's just everything is so carefully crafted into this mesh of Art Deco and death and mysteriousness, and there's just such a level of mystery to it all because you know why he's doing it, but at the same time you're wondering if there was any alternative to this, or if it's just the workings of a psycho.
Mm-hmm.
Because he lost his wife and he's angry at the universe. He doesn't know what to do. And yeah, he turns to violence to solve his problems. But I do believe that in addition to Vincent Price being a great performer, he's also just a great anti-hero. And I think it's important to realize that we all kind of hit points of distress and frustration, and it's what we do with it that makes us as a person. But not everything is black and white. So it's kind of interesting because it leaves you in an ethical dilemma. Like, oh, you know, his wife died and was on the operating table and the doctors fucked up. And so, like, what really could justify this? It's not so clear cut. But that's why I love it. And that's why, you know, it's, I know, like, the critical reception of it, it was definitely mixed, but a lot of people agree that it's 1970s camp horror at its best.
Mm-hmm.
And it definitely, like, it's been featured in top lists before, albeit on the lower end, but it definitely has a cult following. And the music is great too, because at the beginning of the movie, this the song that Fibes, it opens with Fibes playing the organ for a couple minutes, and the song is called War March of the Priests. And it's incidental music that was set to an old play called Athalie. And I found that interesting because the composition was taken from, you know, a very old composer, Felix something, I think Mendelssohn maybe. And it's just the whole theology of it all, and how much of an intellect he is. It was a very great choice of composition, and I really appreciate it for that. Sequel, obviously not as good, but I would still say it's definitely worth it.
Sure.
Yeah, but yeah, that's kind of the abominable Dr. Fibes. If any chance you can watch it, any split second decision you have to make, definitely go for it, because I recommend it. Yeah. Yeah, so that wraps up Fibes for me. If you care to go to your third
that's
movie.
Good stuff right there.
Yeah.
So, do we want to dip into your third one, and we'll end with me then?
Sure. I am just going to very quickly grab some water because I'm parched. But I will be right back.
Sounds fantastic. We will. Uh, I'm not going to cut this out. We're just going to use this as a segue. And we're back.
What happened? Where am I?
Unfortunately, you died in the moments that you went to go take a drink, and I had to reanimate you, which segue.
Oh! Look at you! Oh my goodness, it's like you knew.
It's like I knew. So I know very much that Reanimator is your absolute favorite horror movie.
Absolutely, with hands down, my favorite horror movie. It's not nothing beats it to me. Straight up 5 stars across the board, and it just does everything right for what it's trying to accomplish.
And it's really just such a delightful time. Like delightful in how morbid and disgusting it can be, because this is for anybody that doesn't know, Reanimator the film is based on the H.P. Lovecraft story Herbert West Reanimator.
Yes, it is.
About a doctor who makes a serum that reanimates dead corpses.
Yep, and it is a side note. I also love the work of H.P. Lovecraft, and I've been a fan for a while. Any of his characters, Cthulhu, Dagon, Yog-Sothoth, even the Necronomicon, I love it all. It's just so twisted and dark, and luckily there hasn't been a religion based on it, so that's good. But so Reanimator stuck right in the middle of the 80s, 1985, and what we have is a great fantasy horror film that, like Phil said, is based on the Herbert West Reanimator story, and it was directed by Stuart Gordon, who also has done other Lovecraftian adaptations, including another good one, From Beyond.
Oh my goodness, From Beyond, where we have a delightful scene involving pineal glands sprouting out of people's foreheads and
Yes.
making everybody horny.
Yes. And also Dagon. And so he's done a bunch of other things. And it also stars Jeffrey Combs, who plays Dr. Herbert West, who also has done a variety of H.P. Lovecraft work, who's also in From Beyond.
Jeffrey Combs is a delight, isn't he?
Jeffrey Combs is hands down one of my favorite actors. And it's not, Reanimator aside, he's a brilliant stage performer.
Oh, for sure.
And he's also done great work as Wayon on Star Trek, and he's been in other classic horror films. He's been in like Would You Rather. He's been in shows like Gotham. He's done Broadway runs. He's been inducted into the DC animated universe of collections. He does Edgar Allan Poe readings on stage. He's just like all around a fantastic actor.
And he's sort of like a hero to you, because he's just like, he does everything you love.
Right, yeah, exactly. So Reanimator is it's a black horror comedy, and like I said, it was directed by Stuart Gordon, and it was also produced by Brian Usna, who, if you don't know that name, I'm sure you've heard of some of his films. He has also done the cult classic Society. Was that him? Yes, so he directed Society.
Didn't he write? Wasn't he like the co-writer for Honey, I Shrunk the Kids?
You know, that was one of his credits, I believe.
Which is just compare and contrast.
Yeah, I know, right? but he's also done like Necronomicon, and he also did the sequel Beyond Reanimator, and so he's done a bunch of stuff. And so, but Reanimator, we have Jeffrey Combs as Herbert West, who is a medical student, and the film starts in Switzerland, where, and this is fun because I didn't know that the name Hans Gruber was such a popular name in Germany. Um, because years later in the film Die Hard, as we all know, Alan Rickman's character is Dr. Hans Gruber, not Dr. Hans Gruber, and I always thought that was a great nod. Now, who's to say that Reanimator wasn't the influence for it? And so, anyway, we cut back to him being in Switzerland, and his dead professor, Hans Gruber, he brings him back to life through this experimental serum. But he finds out that there's these horrific side effects whenever the dose is too small or whenever the dose is too large. So he gets accused of killing the doctor. And West just goes, "I gave him life!" So he...
Oh, it's such a good line.
Oh, God, it is. And if you know Jeffrey Combs, you know that his delivery is just impeccable. So he goes to this university in New England to further his studies because now he's like, well, I gotta get away from Switzerland. So he
to the H.P. Lovecraft favorite of Miskatonic University.
Yes, it's like any of the 80s coming of age films taking place in Shermer, Illinois, which doesn't exist.
Exactly.
So he finds this fellow student, Dan Kane, and he notices he has a room for rent. So he coaxes him into letting him rent it. And Dan has this girlfriend, Megan. And it starts to get very, very interesting. So Herbert West decides to convert the basement in this building to his own lab. And one day, West drags Dan into the lab, and he decides that he's going to reanimate their dead cat Rufus. And so Megan walks in while the experiment's happening, and she thinks that West killed the cat. And so Dan sees this, and he's like, oh my God, this is a medical breakthrough, because he saw the cat come back to life. So Dan goes to the dean, who happens to be the father of Megan, and the dean does not believe him, and rightfully so, because who would believe that? And Dan is like, no, it's real, I swear. And the dean's like, you and Herbert West have gone mad, and you need help. So the dean bars them from the school. And so West decides that he needs to prove himself. He needs to clear his name. So they decide to sneak into the morgue at the university. And they're going to test...
As you do.
As you do. And they're going to test the reagent, not on a cat, but on a human. And so they figure they'll salvage their medical careers by doing this. So they inject this one corpse, but it goes a little crazy, as you would imagine. And this crazy zombie starts becoming super violent. And the dean, Dr. Halsey, comes into what's happening, and he's like, holy shit, what's going on? And West and Dan try to prevent the zombie from coming over and killing him, but he ends up dying, which is very unfortunate. So West decides to kill this corpse with a bone saw and seal its fate. So West, he's pretty much desensitized to all of this death by now. So he goes to Dr. Halsey, and he tries to reanimate him. And so Dr. Halsey does return to life, but he's also in a psychotic zombie-like state. And so Megan, as you can imagine, stumbles on the scene and becomes very hysterical because she's seeing her father reanimated. And so Dan just fucking faints in shock. And so now the dean's colleague, Dr. Carl Hill, who's played by David Gale, who I love because he's been in other great horror films like The Guyver and The Brain, and also The Bride of Reanimator. And he he decides to take charge of the dean. And so he throws him in this observation cell. It's basically like it's like akin to a mental asylum. It's like a little padded cell. And so he decides that he's going to lobotomize him to see what the hell's going on. But he sees through this lobotomy that Dr. Halsey is not sick, but he's actually dead and brought back to life. So,
dun, dun, dun.
Right, exactly. So, Dr. Hill ends up going to Dr. West's basement, and he blackmails him into surrendering his reagent and notes, because he instead of just caring about the safety and well-being of the dean, his colleague, he decides he's going to try to take credit for this medical breakthrough.
As you do.
So West says, you know what? I will offer to demonstrate what this does, but I'm not going to give it up. So he puts a few drops of it on a slide, and it was actually the tissue from the dead cat Rufus. And he puts it in a microscope, and as Dr. Hill's looking through it, West decides to take a shovel and pummel him from behind, and then decapitates him. And so he screams,
plagiarist.
Yes, exactly. I was gonna say he screams out plagiarist, and then he's like, "Oh fuck, what did I do?" So he tries to bring back Dr. Hill's head because it's severed from the body, and then he tries to reanimate the body too. And so West, in what can only be described as the pinnacle of comedy, is questioning the decapitated head of Dr. Hill. But while this is happening, Dr. Hill's body comes up from behind and knocks him down to the ground. And so the body takes his head and also the reagent and his notes, and they go back to Dr. Hill's office. And so Dr. Hill finds out that in his reanimated state, he can actually telepathically take control of the other corpses, at least after conducting the brain surgery on them. And that's important because that means, like, there was definitely a lot of tomfoolery going on behind the scenes.
Oh, yeah. Which leads to probably the most famous scene in the movie, which
oh god,
is one of the most uncomfortable scenes in almost any movie I've ever seen.
And I'm going to preface this with a little personal anecdote here. So I believe it was last year, and I don't watch this movie just on Halloween. I watch it like multiple times a year. And on one of my viewings, my very lovely and understanding girlfriend was asleep in the bed next to me. And I decided, you know what? I don't want to waste the day. I'm going to watch Reanimator. So I put it on. And so let me cut in with the actual scene's contents. So Dr. Hill decides to kidnap Megan, and the body takes her clothes off and straps her body to the table. And as she regains consciousness, she notices that the body of Dr. Hill is holding the head of Dr. Hill and is touching her and is placing the head between her legs. Not going to explain the events that conspire, but I'm sure that you get an idea of what happens here. And so this is the exact moment in the movie that my girlfriend decides to wake up. And she's very open-minded and understanding, but understandably so. She kind of freaked out and was like, I'm going to go in the other room while you finish this movie. And would not give it a chance ever again. So, so it was kind of funny. But anyway, West and Dan find out that Megan was at the morgue, and West distracts Dr. Hill while Dan frees his girlfriend. And this is when the villain makes the classic mistake of revealing their plan. And he says that he has reanimated all of these other corpses in the morgue. And now they're under his mind control. So now everyone's screwed. And this includes Megan's father. So now this entire chaotic scene pans out where Dr. Hill revives all these zombies, and they start attacking West and Dan and everyone else in the morgue. And so while West and Dan are dealing with the slew of zombies, Megan is dealing with her father, who is in this altered state of being and cannot even respond to his daughter's voice. But as time goes on, Megan starts to get through to his head. And so he turns on Dr. Hill and he starts attacking him. And so he's fighting off these corpses long enough for Dan and Megan to make an escape, but Dr. West sacrifices himself and stays in the morgue. And so Dr. West is able to inject Hill's body with a very large dose of his reagent. But when this happens, the body mutates and starts attacking West. And he like ties him down with all these tentacles, and he's screaming out to Dan, make sure he saves his work, because he pretty much figures he's gonna die at this point. And so he's being carried away by all the mutated entrails of the Doctor. So as all that happens, Dan escapes. He takes the satchel and he escapes. But when they reach the elevator, one of the corpses starts attacking Megan. And she ends up getting strangled pretty good. And so Dan rushes to the emergency room and tries to revive her, and then realizes that, unfortunately, she's way past that point. And so now she has died. So he decides in one last-ditch effort to get her back, he injects her with the reagent. And the scene fades to black, and Megan can be heard screaming, which is a super unnerving part of the movie, which is the end. But then that goes into the sequel, Bride of Reanimator, which involves Megan, and Dan won't give her up, and he's madly in love with her, and so West decides to work on a new body for her, but that's a whole nother spiel. So, yeah, pretty crazy movie. I absolutely love it. I think it invokes the best of many genres. It's sort of like Frankenstein meets a zombie film, meets a Dracula film. And it's also just, it's just, to me personally, this is a cult classic that just reigns in all of its well-deserved notoriety. And
very much so. Very much so.
And,
I love that, like, so many of our friend group is just like, it's one of their favorites.
Yeah, it's just so strange, and it's just hard to look away the whole time, you know?
Exactly. It's even like the one scene that makes everybody uncomfortable. It's just like, it's so well shot, and that Barbara Crampton has total control over that scene, but like still, it's just like, oh boy.
Oh yeah, for sure. Um, yeah, who's been in other things? I just saw her recently in a movie called Chopping Mall because I'm doing a 30 days of horror, 31 days of horror movie challenge, and I think she's also in From Beyond, so she's got that body of work, and her performance in this is nothing of less of that caliber. But it's interesting that it came out to mostly positive reviews. Because you
Yeah,
you look at the concept and you're like,
it's
it would have probably deterred a lot of people from watching it. But
yeah, and then of course it's like it's referenced in other movies. I think it's what was it, the Kevin Spacey American Beauty movie. I think that's what it is.
oh yeah,
They they actually just reference that scene. And it's just like, oh my god.
yeah. And other than that, production was good, and it's interesting because the soundtrack, the main score, is essentially a ripoff of the Psycho score, and it's like it tries to be unique, but you could just see the similarities. But
Oh, for sure.
Richard Band was like, "Oh, this is intentional," and he used it as a bass and tried to modify the theme while keeping that same tone. But it's pretty much a ripoff. But it's one of my all time favorites. I love it. I love the Arrow video release of it. They did a great remaster of it. They also did Bride of Reanimator. Um, there is a third movie in the series called Beyond Reanimator, which I've only watched one time. I didn't absolutely love it, but I know that release is on Vestron Video, and I've wanted that for a while. But yeah, the series is just one of those things where I can never not be obsessed with it. It's just so eerie. And it's so many different genres wrapped into one that you could find something for everyone in it.
For sure, for sure.
But yeah, so that is Reanimator.
It certainly is.
Yes, yes.
Mhm.
Plagiarist! We came full circle, ladies and gentlemen.
Exactly. My last one is one that I don't talk about enough because I don't see many opportunities to talk about it. But
Okay.
it is this is not only one of my favorite films of all time, but it's also one of my favorite stories,
Ooh.
which is Oscar Wilde's The Picture of Dorian Gray,
Ooh. Okay, good one.
which is a very, in my opinion, underrated horror classic
Oh, super
because
underrated.
like it doesn't have a monster in a way. It just has the morality,
Mm-hmm.
and in a way I think that is in itself a great monster.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, it's very relatable.
Exactly. So for anybody that doesn't know the story of The Picture of Dorian Gray, it involves an aristocrat named, rightfully so, Dorian Gray, who is essentially a naive young man who is getting his portrait painted by his friend Basil Hallward.
Not to be
And
confused with Basil Rathbone.
oh, who's gonna come and be expecting your rent.
Yes.
And uh, one of Basil's friends, Lord Henry Wanton, comes and tells Gray that life is best spent with hedonism. Essentially, like the best things in life are what can be taken away from you at any moment. So you must take pleasure now.
Right.
And being an impressionable young man, he immediately takes this to heart, and his entire life becomes about his own gain and his own pleasures. And he swears that he wishes that his painting would age in his place so he could be eternally youthful. And throughout the story, all sorts of things happen to him that change the face and the body and the portrait entirely, to reflect his dastardly deeds and
Mm-hmm.
whatnot. And it's such a phenomenally well written film and book, because it's it just explores what can be too much,
Right.
and the darkness that lies beneath the simplistic desires of a man and whatnot. And it's tragic in so many ways.
Oh, for sure.
So the film, uh, was made in 1945, and this is actually, like, I want to say, amongst all the things we talked about today, this is the longest film.
Yeah, I do remember it being quite a sit down.
It's a little under 2 hours, I
Yeah.
think, but
Mm-hmm.
it is directed by Albert Lewin, who doesn't have too many films under his belt. Um, most
Yeah.
of the most of his more notable things are his producing credits,
Yeah. Well,
which
he did
in,
direct Pandora and the Flying Dutchman, which, if you've never seen it, is a James Mason and Ava Gardner movie, and
yes,
it is wow, it is a phenomenal movie. I found it randomly on Filmstruck one day, and I was just like, okay, I'm gonna check this out because I've always heard of that story, but wow, I recommend that for anyone who hasn't seen
yeah,
it.
yeah. He's not exactly the most well-known director producer, but
Right.
the stuff that he did have an attachment to, a lot of it's pretty solid.
Yeah.
But the cast of this film is what really, uh, just it's so good. Um, Dorian Gray is played by the wonderful Herd Hatfield, who was an Irish actor. Uh, didn't do many big name films. I think Dorian Gray was is probably his most famous, and it's also one of his first. He was only in one other movie before then,
Yeah, that's true.
and he is acting alongside the legend George Saunders, who plays Lord Henry Wanton.
Yes. Oh, yes.
Which, if you don't know George Saunders, he's another one of those very deep, very uh, just loathsome, like, villain characters who, uh, he played so many really phenomenal roles in his life. Probably the most well known uh, would be Shere Khan in The Jungle Book,
Oh, yes, true. Yep.
which oh my god, he's oozing with just superiority.
Yeah, he's got quite a credit list.
Oh yeah, he's probably, like, oh my god, I think he's in well over 100 movies.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. Think about that.
Yeah, and probably the one that I like the most, besides this that he's in, is and this is probably an odd one for a lot of people, would be The Ghost and Mrs. Muir,
Oh, yes.
which
Right.
starring Gene Tierney and Rex Harrison. I love this movie. It's like a ghost story that is a romance. This woman falls in love with a ghost, and oh my god, it's delightful.
Yes, starring Patrick Swayze.
um, and so and it also stars what I think is one of the best credits in this whole movie, a very young Angela Lansbury,
Yes. Oh,
who
yes.
plays Sybil Vane, a woman that catches Dorian's eye, as she's a beautiful singer, and uh, oh my god, I love her in this role. It's so innocent, and she's waiting for her knight in shining armor to meet her and take her away, and uh, Dorian comes in and he's immediately infatuated with her, and then he immediately does the stupidest thing, and he listens to Lord Henry again, and he sends her a letter dismissing her from his company, and she just kills herself, which just sort of starts Dorian's downward spiral.
Oh yeah.
Um, so in that moment, he notices that the picture changes. What was once this innocent, youthful face turns into like this smug, evil grin that
Mm-hmm.
is barely noticeable, but it's really interesting to see. And one of the coolest things about this movie is the shots of the portrait are in color.
Yeah, that's true.
This is an all black and white film except for the shots of the portrait, and uh it's a very interesting thing because both portraits still exist, and they're really wonderful. One of them, the the picture of the portrait of Herd Hatfield is Dorian Gray, the one that isn't transformed.
Mm-hmm.
uh, I think has been jumping from private collection to private collection for decades.
Oh, that's interesting.
But the portrait that is the disgusting evil image is I believe it's held at the Art Institute of Chicago, and
Oh wow.
I've always wanted to go and see it.
Yeah. Now let's plan the trip now then.
Uh, and it's truly like a terrifying picture. It is so macabre. The colors are like disgusting browns and reds and greens, and it's the best word I could describe to put it to one word is crusty.
Yes,
It
it is
is
crusty.
it is disgusting, but at the same time you just can't look away from it because like it captures the evil that he sort of just surrounded himself in and protruded from every facet of his life.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
Uh, and so after Sybil Vane kills herself, he starts going to opium dens, and he continues to live his days as a true image of hedonism, while he continues to have a youthful face. Um, and then years later, uh, his friend who painted the portrait, Basil Hallworth, who is played by Lowell Gilmore, uh, who I'm trying to remember if there's any other like super notable roles that he was in.
Excuse me. Um. Hmm. I can.
I think he was in oh god, The Secret Garden. The old Secret Garden was one he was in.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm not sure off the top of my head.
Yeah, but not a lot of like big uh big roles for Lowell Gilmore. I think this is probably his most well known.
Hmm. Gotcha.
Um, and so he says, "I want to come see the portrait. I haven't seen it in so long, uh, and I think it's still like to this day my best work." And so he's reluctant to show him as he's locked the portrait away in his childhood nursery,
Mm-hmm.
and he's covered it up with a massive uh, sheet. And so he brings it to he persuades Gray to show it to him. And anytime servants are like too inquisitive about the locked room, he fires them. Like he keeps people away until finally uh, Basil convinces him to see the portrait. And when he finally sees it, Dorian kills him, and he leaves him. Uh, uh, I don't remember if he leaves him in the room and just hides the corpse in there, or if he has it removed and hidden away. I think that's the case.
Hmm.
Because he's told by a doctor friend about getting rid of things with acid and whatnot.
Yeah, right.
But uh, Basil has one of the most interesting lines in this, where he says that the image has this moral leprosy, and it's such a powerful line, because uh, it really has become like the image of a leper who's just a drug addict, and uh, probably has a lot of venereal diseases and whatnot, and just a terrible, terrible person.
Hmm.
Uh, and so after this, he finds that Basil's niece Gladys, who I don't remember who plays her as a child. I don't think that's actually credited. Um, but as an adult, she's played by Donna Reed, who, if you don't know who Donna Reed is, I mean, she's in so much, but probably the most well-known role would probably be Mary in It's a
Oh,
Wonderful Life.
yep. Hmm. That's how I
with,
know her.
with one of our with one of our favorites, Jimmy Stark.
Yes. The good boy.
And as a child, she saw the portrait being painted, and she was always in love with Dorian. So uh, he marries her, and he he's like, maybe I finally found happiness in my life. And in the process of this, like, he goes out on a hunting trip, and the brother of Sybil Vane tries to kill him, and uh, her brother ends up getting killed during this hunting endeavor, and Dorian ends up, like, finally realizing, like, all of the horrors that he's committed throughout his entire life, and uh, he doesn't want Gladys to be subjected to his evils, and in his only defining uh shining moment of knowing that he needs to do one good thing in his life, he stabs the portrait, and the portrait goes back to the youthful smile of Dorian, while his body takes on the image of the portrait, and it's just like this disgusting, withered mass of all of his sins, that it's like a very creepy effect on a prosthetic on his face.
Mm.
And the film ends basically just like that. And it's such a classic film that I wish more people knew about it, because it's not it's not Dracula, it's not Frankenstein, but it deserves so much more than what it's gotten.
Yeah, I've only watched the film once, and I watched it a long time ago with my mom, and I really like it because it does symbolize a lot of what made classic horror good, but at the same time, it combines it with the same atmosphere of like a MGM melodrama, and
Mm-hmm.
it's just like it seems like a cat and mouse game of psychological wits between the character
Exactly.
and himself. So I really like that part of it.
Mm-hmm. And it's actually it's an Academy Award winner too. It
Oh,
won
is it?
Best Cinematography in 1946.
Oh, that's awesome.
Uh, for a black and white film, and uh, it's I hope beyond hope that maybe there will be a Blu-ray restoration someday. I I know that MGM holds the rights, and they're usually good with releasing stuff again every now and again, but I have not seen a proper restoration of this film planned around.
Yeah, I'm. I do know that there was a they did like a Warner Archive release of it, but I really don't know the specs on that. I can't imagine it's fantastic, but I mean, it is Warner, so maybe. But yeah, I
Mm.
would love to see more recognition for this film.
Oh, and I completely forgot that Peter Lawford is in this movie too.
Oh yes, the he was also pretty young too in it.
Oh, very much so. And Peter Lawford is most famous for being famous.
I mean, yeah.
Like he was related to the Kennedys, and he was part of the Rat Pack. He's just like he's famous for all these different famous things, and
Yeah.
in reality, he's a really fine actor.
Yeah. He is. But yeah, it's kind of like the that Hollywood nepotism that landed him where he was. But
Exactly.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, truly, like this is just one of those films that has a star-studded cast for the era that it was in.
Hmm.
Um, it it features a lot of really wonderful actors that continued to flourish in their careers. George Saunders and Angela Lansbury and Peter Lawford, you know, they all and Donna Reed, they all had uh, exceptional careers past this, and Angela Lansbury is thankfully still with us.
Yes, yes. She's a very young, what, 94, I think.
93, yeah.
93, yeah. Well, yeah, thank God she's still around.
And it's a nice little thing. I watched I've watched I think it was either a commentary or it was a small little documentary about the film that's featured on the release that I have, um, that talks about how she was best friends with Hurd Hadfield for the rest of their lives.
Oh,
Uh,
that's so sweet.
and and Hadfield uh, died some years ago. I don't remember just when. I know it was a pretty decent length ago. I think maybe it was in the 90s. Yeah, 98, 98. He died at 81.
Hmm.
And I believe he left like everything he ever owned to Lansbury.
That's pretty crazy.
Um, and I know that he left at the very least his home in Cork, Ireland, to her,
Oh, okay. Wow.
which is just I love hearing this the love that they had for each other because he was much more of a smaller role kind of guy, but the roles that he was in absolutely stunned.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
Uh, and that I think wraps this up. We
So now we'll
this
talk
is just
about
a
our eight
taste of.
favorite horror films. Oh, God.
uh, I will say if I had about 10 weeks more time, I would just list more and more uh, of my favorite horror things. Some runner-ups for what I wanted to talk about include Over the Garden Wall, which is a short series that Cartoon Network released a few years back that I think is now just a fall favorite for me. Um,
Yeah, and you actually introduced me to that, and I absolutely loved it.
the animation's fantastic, the cast is fantastic. You know, you got Elijah Wood in there, you got John Cleese and Tim Curry.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy.
Some really fantastic voices in that, and then uh for anime, I watch a few episodes of Yami Shibai every year, which is a quick watch since they're like 4-minute episodes of little spooky stories, and
Mm-hmm.
uh, I'll watch an episode or two of ghost stories because I need a good laugh as well. Um, and Probably the video game that I return to every year is in whether or not I play it or I watch it is a tie between Until Dawn and Silent Hill 2.
Ooh, excellent choices.
I um I love Silent Hill 2. It is one of the most well-written video games ever made. I really love the story of James Sunderland and Until Dawn. Oh my god, uh, it's it's hammy and it's got jump scares galore here and
Yeah.
there, but it's one of the few games that features one of my favorite mythological creatures, the Wendigo, and I think that in itself is really fun because they do a really good job with it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, there's just so many other things I could talk about. Halloween specials, like the the Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy Halloween special
Oh yes.
is is a really good one.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the Ed and Eddie one,
Of a
uh,
classic.
and of course the Hey Arnold ghost story episodes, which one of my favorites being the Headless Cabby and the Ghost Bride,
Yes, yes. We
which
had a lovely conversation about that yesterday.
yes, we had such a fun conversation about Hey Arnold last night, which was really fun. What are some of your runner ups that you would love to mention?
If we're talking in regards of Halloween traditions, I
Mhm.
actually don't have a lot. The two main ones I'll do are Halloween, obviously the John Carpenter film.
Mhm.
And sometimes I may watch a sequel or two, but it's usually at least just Halloween. And
Mhm.
now I have the 4K transfer, so the black shadows and contrast looks really nice. And I also watch the Great Pumpkin, Charlie Brown.
Classic.
Yeah, it's some nice fall viewing, and but yeah, I mean, I watch other spooky things too, like you were mentioning, like Halloween specials. I excuse me, I'm sorry.
It's all right.
um,
Uh,
I've seen like trying to remember what it's called. The oh yeah, right, the Garfield one, the Halloween Adventure.
mm,
I've watched that one, and yeah, things here and there, but those are really my traditions.
right. Yeah. Um, and of course, the one that I always love is every year, Turner Classic Movies runs House of Wax on Halloween, which I always watch. It's one of Price's best movies.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
I've been kind of getting into watching Cat People every Halloween now as well.
Which one?
The oh god, the older Cat People.
Oh man, that is. I'm glad you know about that movie because I watched that for the first time like 2 years ago, and
Mm-hmm.
I was absolutely stunned by how much I liked it. Because it's kind of like that fantasy story where they don't allude to the monster too much, but
Mm-hmm.
whenever Simone Simon is feeling very lusty, she turns into this very ferocious feline that you could see like off camera, and you know it's there, but like you don't directly see it. But yeah, I have the Criterion. I absolutely love that. Simone Simon is also in another movie with a good boy, Jimmy Stewart, which
Oh.
is Seventh Heaven, which I came
Mm-hmm.
across randomly on YouTube one day. And It has religious overtones, but overall, there's great message to it, and it's kind of blew me away. It's a very under the radar 1930s movie, but I would definitely
Hmm.
recommend it. But yeah, Cat
Yeah, for
People,
sure.
absolutely. I love that movie.
Well, I think that we've given enough recommendations for a few spooky things to watch for the rest of Spooky Month.
So let's
Thank
talk
you
about
once
Thanksgiving
again.
films.
Yeah.
No.
How many Thanksgiving films are
None,
there?
none. You know what's funny? Last year on my podcast, the Silver Screen Fiends podcast, shameless plugging. We were trying to come up with Thanksgiving films, and I think like we had three. I was like, "There's none that take place around this holiday."
Yeah, and I mean, who cares? Who
Oh, right,
cares about Thanksgiving? Honestly,
exactly. It's a bullshit holiday to begin with, but I
exactly,
just found that funny
exactly.
in our research. But
Yeah, but at the very least, I hope that you all enjoy your spooky month. Enjoy all the tricks and treats and the ghouls and goblins that you enjoy indulging in. And thank you once again for being my favorite guest on my guest glasses.
oh well, thank you very much for having me again and having me as always. It was very fun. You're like one of the few people that I can drone on to for like 3 hours. So I
uh,
appreciate that we can get together and do this.
very much so, and hopefully we'll be seeing each other in person soon, and we'll try and do another special recording while we're actually together, so we don't have to rely on Discord.
Yes, definitely. So we hope the quality's been good, but we will have some good primary material soon.
uh, so I thank you once again, ladies and gentlemen, for tuning in, and happy Halloween. Love ya, boy.
Thanks again for having me.
Yep. Have a good day.
Bye bye.
Bye.
一目であなたは見せられましたねこの朝夜景が見える部屋に暗闇の中を放ち庭へ舞い飛ぶ蝶がすぐに来ますよ